Good evening and welcome to the December 14th, 2022 meeting of the East Lansing Planning Commission. Mr. Menzer, would you please call roll?
I'd be happy to. Good evening. Chair Bowman.
Here.
Vice Chair Sullivan will be absent tonight. Commissioner Williams.
Here.
Commissioner Wolf.
Here.
Commissioner Lapine will be absent this evening. Commissioner Wagner.
Here.
Commissioner Hendricks, we are expecting him. Commissioner Boyd.
Here.
Commissioner Denault.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Quorum, thank you. You have in front of you an agenda for this evening's meeting. I will entertain a motion to approve that agenda.
So moved.
Second.
That's been moved by Commissioner Williams and seconded by Commissioner Wolf to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? That motion carries. You also have a copy of the minutes of the, or draft minutes of the November 11th, 2022 meeting of the Commission. I will entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved. Support.
It's been moved by Commissioner Denault and seconded by Commissioner Williams. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? That motion carries. We have no committee reports to the CBDG committee has not met yet.
Oh, we did. So we had our first meeting.
Spring, are you
I don't really have quite a full report, but we met last week on Thursday.
Sure.
Just to go over the requirements. The applications are due on the 15th, so this week, and then we'll meet in January to go over the applications and talk about divvy out the funds.
Sure.
But it's great.
Thank you. Thanks for stepping into that role. Item 3, staff reports. Mr. Menzer.
Just a couple of things to go over with you. So tonight's the last Planning Commission meeting of the year. The next meeting is January 11, 2023. City's going to be closed basically the Friday and Monday for each holiday. So the 23rd and the 26th, and then December 30th and January, was it 2 or January 1? January 2. So the Friday and the Monday around Christmas Day and New Year's, just as FYI. So the Planning Commission last met on November 9, which didn't seem like it was that long ago, but since that time, I'll just kind of run through a couple things that we've been up to and then a couple of things that have been at council lately. So this group has talked a couple times about the accessory dwelling unit policy initiative. So I did present to council on November 15th at their discussion only meeting and didn't get a no. So far. So they talked about, I kind of ran through a presentation just talking about kind of why it's important and the different elements that we've discussed in terms of a draft ordinance so far. So we got some feedback and had some questions and some feedback on that, and was basically told, to go, to continue working on this. It's a valid exercise. It doesn't mean we're necessarily going to end up with a policy, but it's worthwhile staff time. So we continue to tweak a draft ordinance. And since that time, I went to the Age-Friendly Communities meeting, I think it was the next morning. I went to the Housing Commission a couple weeks ago, and I'll be at the neighborhood, what do they call it, the Council of Neighborhood Presidents at some point in January. And then my goal would be then come back to this group with, or maybe I think probably go to council with a draft ordinance and ask them about initiating something and sending it to this group to hold a public hearing. So some progress on that front, and we'll continue to keep at it. Let's see. So that was on 15th. I think right around then we also, at that same meeting, we talked about the Coleman and West. So this is the city owns 27-acre property at the southwest corner of Coleman and West. We had a request for proposals out that ultimately 3 proposals were returned. It was on that agenda on the 15th to talk with council about it. So the director of our department, Tom Fehrenbach, talked briefly with council, that kind of just ran through the 3 presentations. So those are, I can send this link to this group if you haven't seen that already, but the proposals are out there. Council talked about it for a little bit, and then they had a member absent that evening, so it said that they would bring it back at a future agenda. So we're tentatively scheduled to talk about it at council's first meeting in January. So hopefully more on that soon. On the December 6th council meeting, our esteemed colleague Commissioner Wagner was appointed for a new 3-year term, and then I've got a couple things kind of coming down the pike. So at the January 10th council meeting will be the public hearing for the rezoning that's on your agenda tonight at 1788 Woodside Drive. And also at that meeting on the 10th would be the public hearing for 2040 Merit, the special use permit for the adult marijuana. It was initially going to be on a previous meeting. There's a publishing error with City Pulse, so we just had to bump that public hearing. So it's still in the pipeline, still happening. And work does continue on that building on the site right now. For your January 11th meeting, we'll likely have a public hearing on a site plan to facilitate 2 additions to the building at 3400 West Road to have the new German drive train company Attesteo, you may have heard, is moving to East Lansing. So the premise there is that they would move into, and you heard from Mr. Gentilozzi when they were here representing the rezoning a couple weeks ago, but they have pulled the trigger on submitting a site plan application. I just got it, so I'm going to be going through that and quickly tomorrow morning and possibly posting a notice ahead of time for the January 11th Planning Commission meeting. But ultimately what's happening on that site is the current tenants of 3400, the big industrial building that's been there for quite some time, are going to be vacating the premise. They actually have, the city's already issued a demo permit to essentially empty out that building and demo everything inside, make it a big open space. And they're coming back now for a site plan application to do 2 small additions to the building. And then for the building permit to ultimately build out, following that would be the building permit to build it out for Attesteo. So that project is moving quickly. So hoping to have that for public hearing with you in January. So that's what we've got. And then pending the kind of the discussion on form-based code this evening, we'd also like to have that back on your agenda in January. So thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Menzer? Commissioner Wolf?
Yeah, the site plan for 3400 West Road, is that only for the existing building and the demo, or does it include the new building?
It is only for the current building right now. I'm expecting an application, a separate application shortly for the new building.
Thanks.
Other questions for Mr. Menzer?
No.
All right, thank you. That will move us on to item 4, commissioner announcements. And then on to item 5, communications from citizens. We did receive one bit of communication regarding our old business for the property at 1788 Woodside Drive. That was in our packet. However, this would be the time in our meeting when we've got members of the public to come forward and make comments on our agenda, either on items that are currently on our agenda or just items that need to be brought to the attention of the Planning Commission. I'm seeing no one coming forward. Ms. Ordialis, doesn't look like we have anybody in the queue.
Anyone in the queue?
Thank you. And that'll move us on. We have no public hearings, and that'll bring us to our first item of old business tonight. This is an ordinance 1517, a request to conditionally rezone 1788 Woodside Drive from B2 to RM32. Mr. Menzer?
I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Taylor.
Please.
All right, just making sure my mic's working. So at the last meeting in November, the public hearing was held for the request to conditionally rezone 1788 Woodside Drive from B2 to RM32 with the condition that should the applicant ever voluntarily relinquish their potential future Class 4 rental license for the property, it will revert back to its current zoning of B2. The Planning Commission discussed a few items, primarily concerning the appropriateness of the proposed zone, RM32, in light of the existing structure on the property, which is a single-family detached home, and in light of the FLUME designation, the future land use designation of R1 for the site, and the southern neighborhood designation of R1. So the properties to the south are currently designated R1. That was discussed as well. At that same meeting, staff brought up a few concerns, primarily that the condition itself does not meet the standard of being related to the use or development of the land, as the use of the property is not being changed with or without a rental license. The use of the property will remain residential. That concern is the primary concern. Secondarily, if the condition were to be considered, barring what I just previously stated, there is the possibility for the condition to allow for the reversion of the lot to B2, which would make its current use as it stands now non-conforming. As it exists now, the lot is non-conforming in use, as it's a single-family dwelling in a B2 district. It's not allowed. It's not conforming. So if it were to be in RM32, it would become a conforming use. And if it potentially could revert back, it would revert back to a non-conforming use. So that's a secondary consideration, but very important. There's a few other concerns that we brought up as well, that staff brought up as well. That's the house is not currently listed as a rental, and the condition presupposes the acquisition of a rental license, which would require zoning variances to be acquired from the ZBA, as well as the property meeting all relevant building codes and possibly getting variances from the Building Board of Appeals as well. And finally, that there's no definitive time period on the condition, so there's no time allotment on the condition or consideration. So it also doesn't consider changes to ownership of the property or the surrounding land uses. So it makes it a little bit more amorphous. I'd like to remind you of some of the uses of the proposed zone, which is RM32. By right, RM32 allows for single, two-family, multifamily dwellings, as well as extended care facilities like nursing homes. By special use permit, there's several different uses that are allowed. Art galleries, libraries, museums, nonprofit organizations, recreational centers, professional buildings, professional offices such as dentists or lawyers, and then public utility buildings, and also Class B multifamily dwellings, which are group quarters or group living situations such as fraternities and sororities. Those are also allowed by special use permit in this zone. So tonight, it's before the Planning Commission for action, and the Planning Commission has a few options, and I'll list them now. The first one being that recommending approval for the proposed condition, recommending approval with the proposed condition, recommending approval without the proposed condition, recommending approval for rezoning to an entirely different zoning district, or recommending denial of the rezoning. So those are the four options that are for action that the Planning Commission can take tonight. The draft motion before you that's been written and given to you on the in the packet is written in the affirmative. It's important to note that it's written in the informative, but that doesn't reflect staff concerns or anything like that. It's just provided to recommend approval of the rezoning of the request so that it can fail or be recommended, or it can be changed. A different motion can be proposed reflecting one of the other four options that the Planning Commission chooses. Are there any questions?
Questions for Ms. Van Winkle? Okay, I'll note that the applicant is here as well. It presumably would be available to answer questions if you have any, if we have any. If not, I guess a motion would be in order so that we can discuss what, how we might proceed. Commissioner Wolf.
Sure, I'll speak up here. Given the four options just listed by Ms. Van Winkle, which I wasn't necessarily aware that all of those were available to us, I will move that we recommend rezoning 1788 Woodside Drive from B2 to R1.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
And I should have said that would be an unconditional
Presumed, right.
rezoning.
Well, I will second the motion only so that we can have a
Indeed.
discussion about it. I'm not sure that I'm prepared to vote
Thank you.
in favor, but I would like to have a
Appreciate that.
discussion.
All right, thank you. So is there a discussion on the motion, Commissioner Wolf?
Sure. First of all, I agree with staff that the conditional rezoning is not appropriate. I have slightly different, or maybe additional reasons for it. When you look at our own ordinance about conditional rezoning, it implies that a conditional rezoning should be in the best interest of the city as well as being advantageous to the applicant. And I don't see anything about this the condition on this rezoning that is in the best interest of the city. Now, that's kind of similar to what you mentioned, that having it revert to B2 would be creating a non-conforming use when it comes back to that. So I guess they are related. There's no advantage to the city to having that revert. There's no neighbors clamoring to say that this should be rezoned to B2 later. It would be inconsistent with the master plan. If the city wanted to rezone it later to B2, they're perfectly capable of doing it without a conditional rezoning. So that would be the reason I would not be voting for a conditional rezoning. I think there's also no advantage to the city to rezone this to RM32. The use on the property is a single-family home. The master plan calls for this property to be R1 in the future, not some type of multifamily housing. I think that the practical difference on the property between the two zonings, if it were zoned RM32, the applicants have said that they would be trying to get a Class 4 rental license for it, presumably in the hopes of renting to more than 2 people or a family. If it were zoned R1, it would be ineligible for a Class 4 license, but it would be eligible for a, what is it, a Class 1? Or I can't remember. So it could still be used as a rental property. I think we have too few single-family homes in the city that are eligible for rental licenses for families because of our rental restriction overlays. So if this were rezoned R1, it would provide a property of that type. I don't think we need any more Class 4 licenses, which is what we'd be getting if we rezoned it to RM32. If you look at the area around it, in fact, the R1 zone to the south, all of that is an R03 rental restriction overlay. So they cannot have rental licenses there. So I guess that's my basic thoughts about it, that the conditional rezoning is not appropriate. The RM32 is not appropriate. The best use for the city, and I think for the applicants, would be R1.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Oh, sorry. Oh,
I just clarification, or not clarification, it sounded like the applicant just asked me a similar question. For R1, the max rental is 2 unrelated persons for a non-owner occupied structure per zoning. Just wanted to make that.
Sounds right. Yep.
Okay.
Right.
I just want to tell you that directly.
Any other comments or discussion? Well, I'll add that I'm a similar mind as Commissioner Wolf regarding the idea of the overlay or the condition that, as I understand the purpose of the condition is to sort of make an otherwise unattractive application a little bit more palatable for the city, basically saying, like, as was done in the example property that was offered by the applicant, if the use switches from, from religious, it would revert, the zone would revert back to, was it R1? It was going to be a residential use regardless, that basically saying that it wasn't going to continue in its civic use, and it wasn't going to be anything more intense, but it was going to be something that was going to be, well, less intense in order to make that switch. And so the safeguard is put in place. I hadn't really thought about it in terms of sort of the benefit to the city and to the applicant, but that is essentially the same thing, is that the condition is put in place so that the applicant can get what they want, but there would be a trade-off that the city would be protected as well. And so I'm comfortable with, with what's being proposed in terms of not proposing a condition. I was actually thinking that that the RM32 use would be equally suitable. I appreciating what you're saying about the future land use. There's that sort of notch that's taken out, and there is no intense residential use. It's all commercial use, and so I'm of a mind to think that I could go either way. I'm comfortable with what's being proposed in terms of the motion. If a similar motion were made to support RM32, I would be comfortable with that as well. Commissioner Wagner.
So Dan, I was not here last month for this discussion. Did the applicant give a reason or a benefit to the city for the conditional rezoning?
Well, I don't know that there was any, and we could ask them. There's no reason why we couldn't have them come forward, although we're sort of in discussion regarding the motion right now. The reason that that was offered for why the condition was put in place is just to make sure there's certainly no guarantee that if the property were rezoned to a R1 or RM32, that in the future that it could be or absolutely would be rezoned back to B2 if that is a more appropriate use at that time. And so I think they were just trying to hedge their bets, trying to give as much control to an uncertain future as they could. Personally, and I know I won't be on the commission probably at that time, I can't see why rezoning it back to B2 or whatever that future business land use is at the time would be entirely appropriate. But they're just trying to anticipate the future as much as possible. Any other discussion? Commissioner Denault, sure. Go ahead. Yep.
I really appreciate the point that there's, I think, too many rentals that are not for single families or for a nuclear family, and I see that in my own neighborhood as well. And so I really appreciate your comment regarding that point for R1 versus R32. I will say, though, that one of the things that's still, I guess, ringing in my brain is the last time that we met, the applicant said that they intended to build townhouses if, everything goes their way in this area. And I could easily see multiple family units in multiple townhouses in the same physical space, rather than one family in one house. And so I think if we're advocating for more types of that type of rental that are available to single families, I guess I would lean towards the RM32.
Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but this wouldn't preclude that. If they decided in the future they wanted to do that, they could come back with an application to build that, and there's a good chance the city would be receptive to building townhouses there, so.
That's a good point.
Any other discussion? All right, seeing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion to rezone the property from B1 to R1 to B2 to R1 unconditionally, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? That motion carries. I don't know. Yeah, I think your next step is to take that to council, or to reconsider a different application here. Yeah, it's going to go to council. Our recommendation will go to council unless you don't want it to. Okay. All right.
Or a three-story apartment. Or a three-story apartment.
Yeah, okay. All right, thanks. That'll move us on to item 8.1, form-based code update.
All right, good evening. Thanks for the opportunity here. We just wanted to follow up on a discussion that started back in July at a work session. And I remember not everybody was at the work session, so this seemed like an opportune time to bring it back and talk a little bit more about the form-based code initiative in the city. Don't think we need to go into the whole history of the project, because a lot of you have lived through it, as did I. But the Shaping the Avenue draft came out of many meetings on form-based code. What we talked to you back in July about is actually an intern that was on our team at the time. One of the two interns that were here showed you a series of maps for an area east of the downtown, basically Orchard Street to Spartan Avenue. So there's some maps in your meeting packet if you get a chance to pull that up. The idea here would be to attempt to implement the form-based code, which is called Shaping the Avenue, in a smaller area. So the very first map in your packet is the entire project area that was contemplated for form-based code. And this is not an attempt to deviate that from whatsoever, but it seemed like it might be easier to do a smaller test area. And you've heard this before, but it sounded like they were supportive of that at the time. So that's what our team has proceeded in doing. So we landed on this, and what was presented in July was this small area to the east of the downtown area, south of Ann Street, basically from an alley just located just west of Orchard Street to an alley to the east of Spartan Avenue. It includes the Grand River Avenue frontage, properties that have frontage on Grand River, and a whole bunch of houses in the middle there. So in your meeting packet, you've got some thematic maps. Like I said, the first one's the entire area. The second one's our test area, and what you're seeing there are the frontages. So those are the actually, in form-based code, they're called frontages. Think of them as zoning districts. Anything that fronts, for example, on an orange line would have the provisions in the Shaping the Avenue draft that relate to orange, so R4. So it's just a little bit different way of drawing zoning maps. So, and this is, again, no filter, no edits at all. This is the Shaping the Avenue draft that came out of the series of meetings in 2021. So that's the area right now. What you're seeing, let's see, a few down, most of that area in the master plan, or the zoning, it's all zoned R2, or a lot of it. And the stuff on Grand River is B2, so single-family homes. Most of them are single-family detached homes. Future land use map calls mostly for R4, and then M3 along Grand River. There is some historic district in this zone, in this area, so the western portion is in the Bailey Historic District. And then you can see a map with rentals, so there are basically every parcel that has a color to it is a rental. So there are very few owner-occupied properties in that area. So for all those reasons, this is why that area was selected. It's kind of and I don't mean any offense to the people that live there and that own the properties, but it's more of the stock's a bit tired. It's primarily rentals right now. So it seemed like this might be one area that's city where we could take advantage of something like this and implement a code that would allow for and encourage redevelopment of this area, and potentially with structures that would add to density in this area. It's right across the street from campus. It's adjacent to the downtown. There are a lot of factors that kind of play into this, why this area seems like a good start. And overall, the idea is to implement it in this small area and then look at either the entirety of the rest of the initiative or another small area where it might be a little more strategic. So to get the conversation started, so I think part of this is we have some questions for you, and then maybe you have some questions for us. I know it's not a work session, but this is what we had for you tonight. So first of all, I wanted to know if there's any information you've been provided so far. Is there anything missing in terms of information we should collect on this neighborhood that would be helpful in kind of determining where we go with this, or if this area is appropriate for implementation of the form-based code? So like I said before, I was a part of the form-based code initiative in Meridian Township, but I wasn't a part of the meetings and public input. So I'm also would be interested on kind of where this has been in terms of public input sessions. I know there were a couple, but if any of you that were participating in that could give us an idea of how much kind of vetting this has received from people that live in that area. I've heard from some of the owners, they say, what happened to the form-based code initiative? When are you going to do it? Were you excited about it? But So if we can start there, and I have some further stuff.
Commissioner Donald?
Some additional information that I would find helpful, because there is overlap with the Bailey Historic District. It would be helpful to get a better understanding of how many structures are contributing structures to that historic district within that small section. And it would be helpful to know if the city has done a historic resources survey within the past 10 years.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
And the way this would work, so I'm not at this point saying that we're saying that it should be removed from the historic district. So any redevelopment would have to go through a historic district commission, even as is. So I don't think and I'm not suggesting you suggested this, but I don't think being a part of the historic district commission would disqualify any particular area here. It's basically one more point of review. So they would also, in addition, if the redevelopment was proposed there, it would not only go through the site plan process, which includes planning commission and council, but also the historic district commission. Any other big pieces of information that kind of, as you're seeing this, want to know more about before we proceed with this area? Is there a general comfort level with the geographic area that we've selected? We've had this discussion before, but again, not everybody was there, and I was hoping to kind of have a broader, at least a chance for conversation on it.
Commissioner Wolf?
So, were you asking us how much public review there has been on this? Or?
Yeah, I was hoping that someone
hear
would have
that
participated
question?
in that could give Taylor and I some background on it.
Yeah, very little is the way I would say.
I expected that there would be more. That from whether from this point forward or at some time in the past, that before
Right.
this was implemented, this was going to see a lot more daylight.
Okay.
Our subcommittee that worked on it had open meetings, but we had very, very few members of the public attend those meetings. We never had a community-wide announced meeting about it, right? We did discuss it at a couple of planning commission meetings where it was on the agenda and people could have come. But again, there was very little attendance. We heard from some property owners and developers, maybe no more than a dozen, but maybe half a dozen or.
Exactly.
Right. I actually had feedback from some of the Hagans on it.
David Pearson and
I would also add that
David Krause.
the draft code that you refer to here, we did not really consider it to be finished. At one time, there was a document that went with it that had numerous questions that were to be considered by city council, right?
Yes.
That we decided were first too difficult for the committee to make recommendations on, and even beyond what the planning commission wanted to do right at that point. We wanted city council feedback on those.
Okay.
There are also some unresolved issues because of the fact that we are not implementing this as an overlay, but we're doing it as a whole new zoning. There are some things in our basic code that would no longer apply to some of these properties. Well, let me just give you an example so you understand what I'm talking about. For example, our requirement for electric vehicle chargers to be installed in certain businesses or apartments that have parking above a certain size. That's in a separate part of the code, and it specifically lists which zones it applies in, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And of course, the form-based code zones are not on that list. So if these were rezoned to that, it would no longer apply to them. That would need to be considered to decide, do we want it to? And I think there are some other similar examples like that that need to be found in the code. I
Okay.
don't think any of them are major, but it's kind of, a little cleanup.
Some cross-referencing between current provisions and shaping the avenue. Okay.
Right, that might no longer apply if these were rezoned to the form district zones.
Yeah, just my own sense is that I envisioned something, if not at the same scope, that when the comprehensive plan was rolled out, there were several community-wide meetings where the map was sort of laid out for everybody to look at and took place in different parts of the city. And people were encouraged to, and did attend, to give their input on the proposals that were being made for, whatever particular part of the city that interested them. And that again, it might very well be because we were looking at, because we sort of worked on this through the pandemic, or the pandemic happened in the middle of when we were reviewing this, or maybe, at the end, whatever.
Okay.
That, the opportunity for large public hearings was just not going to happen then. And now with the change of scope, there's an opportunity to do that perhaps on a somewhat smaller basis. But I think it seems to me that not enough people that are likely to be impacted by this, and there were more people that were likely to be impacted by the larger map, that were not made aware adequately to what the impact might be.
Okay.
And I think that that's really more of it hadn't happened yet. At least that's my take, is that it wasn't going to happen, or that staff wasn't going to do it, but that it just hadn't happened yet.
Okay. Well, all of this is going to really inform kind of we're going to be working on an implementation plan. And it presupposes, what I'm talking about, I think presupposes that there are not necessarily approvals, but some general support for this initiative, which again, we have not gone to City Council and talked about it in detail, or vetted this with the owners of that area yet. So, and really, I think what has to happen is we will incorporate that into, we weren't quite sure where it stopped and where we need to go with it. So that's an important step, kind of middle step before this gets too far, is engaging with the folks that live there and own those properties, resolving the issues with the questions on the policy. And then, so, yeah, that was, what was the comfort level? Because I wasn't sure, and there's several new members here too, of the familiarity with the provisions and the Shaping the Avenue form-based, the code itself. And I'm assuming there might be a couple that haven't been in depth on it yet.
So the three members of the committee that vetted the text are still on the commission right now.
Okay.
The three of us. I think Commissioner Wagner was a member of the commission at the time, but Commissioner Boyd and Commissioner Denault were not.
Okay.
Commissioner Sullivan was. Commissioner Lapine might have been. Maybe not. Yeah. No, you can do the, just go back and take a look
I can
at the
search that
minutes,
part
right?
out.
But, so I would say that, approaching half of the current commission's makeup is not, fully informed about what's going on.
Would it be, as we consider a work plan moving into the next year, would it be helpful to kind of, over the next couple of meetings, re-engage with the form-based code, the language itself, and we can focus on different sections? I know there's a lot there.
No, that's right. Because, part of the meetings were that, when we got to an impasse at the meeting, or at the committee meetings, there was information that, as Commissioner Wolf had said, was brought back to the full commission, and then things that couldn't be sorted by the full commission or just weren't sort of within their authority to decide were moved up to council. I think one of them had to do with what bonuses would be applied and how they would be, sort of what, would there be ways to handle bonus heights that really was probably more for council to determine.
Okay.
Commissioner Wolf, sorry.
Are you aware of the document? It was one of the many that Darcy produced while we were working on this, that consisted of the questions still to be resolved.
I am, and I believe, from what I remember, they were pretty design-focused questions, or specific policies. Okay.
Yeah, they covered quite a gamut, as I remember.
Yes, I am familiar with that.
Yeah, because that kind of gives you an idea of the things that we considered unfinished.
Okay. well, in this current kind of strategy, what we were hoping tonight was to get some information on kind of how well-versed the commission was and how much kind of buy-in there has been for the current language, familiarity with those provisions, but then also if there's any information about that area that you might want to know that we can gather in before the next meeting or the meeting after. General support for the project area as described in terms of being a smaller area that might be a little easier to implement, and also as a kind of a bite-sized geographic area instead of and it's all a similar type of housing versus a lot of different types of land use along the Grand River corridor. And then where we are at in terms of public input and notification, as well as the classifications of the form-based code classifications of the properties in this area. So are they classified the way that we're expecting? So that was what I was hoping over the next couple meetings to start hitting on that. I was considering tonight kind of just a reintroduction to the topic because, like I said earlier, only a few of you were here when we talked about it in July. And then if we're going to move ahead, I wanted to be ready to hit you in January with a plan of attack as to how we might move ahead and some steps.
Commissioner Wagner?
Peter, I think I'm comfortable with most of it. I'm looking at the map of implementation, and my only concern, I think, is the upper northwest corner, Orchard Street, where the block is a majority owner-occupied housing. And I don't know. I mean, I would think if I were an owner, I mean, most of it's rental, right? But that particular block is a majority owner-occupied. So I would probably be in favor of not including that in this introductory rollout.
So you're talking about the block north of Orchard, north of Albert.
Yeah.
Okay, on both sides.
Right.
Or perhaps take the opportunity to reach out,
Well,
it's going to happen
Right.
anyway, but just explain to them what the impact, if any, will be on, this change in
Right.
zoning, right?
Yeah.
I think
So-
that's the key.
So that would be good if we could communicate with them. But I do know that also overlaps with the historic district. And I know a lot of the rentals in that area. I mean, there's nothing really historic about them. I mean, left, right? But I mean, maybe some of those houses are. And I don't know.
Commissioner Denault?
You've already provided some reasons as to why y'all chose this section to start implementing or experimenting with implementing the new form-based code. I guess I have two questions. One, what were the other areas that you considered at the time that you might be able to offer to us instead of this? And the second question is, would you consider an even smaller portion of this as kind of the experimentation, implementation area?
I could provide some initial answers. The other areas for implementation, I haven't considered other places for a different spot. This seemed kind of to be a fairly homogeneous mix of freestanding dwellings that are mostly rentals that seem to be mostly student rentals, and it, nothing to do with the occupants of the structures, but this area. And it seemed like it was geographically bound in a way that all kind of matched up. So with the exception of the commercial, it's all a similar type of house. And north of it's kind of ringed in too, because there's a rentals restriction area to the east. There's the Bailey neighborhood to the north, and the west is really the downtown area. And then you've got campus and everything down south. So that was just the kind of basic reasoning. Had not considered a small area. Certainly anything's on the table. Wherever this group wants to go with it, we're on board.
Other comments for staff or input for staff? You started with a couple of questions. One of them had to do with, did this get enough, exposure? And I think we've answered that sufficiently, but were there others in particular that you were looking for?
I don't think anything that we need we need answers for tonight. I wanted to really just reintroduce the topic, tell you that we'd like to come back in January with implementation plan as to how we might go with this. What I was hoping to hear tonight, and we've heard a little bit about it, and if there's anything else, just let us know. If there's something you think is crucial to know about these areas, about this property, about, well, we'll dive in on the form-based code itself, but that we could gather information in the meantime, kind of leading up to a larger discussion.
Commissioner Wolf?
We haven't really been explicit about why we're doing this, but why we're doing the test, why we're doing the form-based code in general. Is it accurate to say that choosing this area as the first area to apply the code, we are hoping for redevelopment? Is that not the goal here?
Ideally, yes. It seemed like a place that might be ripe for redevelopment.
Right. If we apply it to it and there is no redevelopment, then in effect, the code is not having any effect, right?
Potentially.
Yeah. So I do feel as though it's very hard for us to predict what area of the city might actually become redeveloped first or most easily, or but I think that's part of our thinking in choosing this area, that it is perhaps a prime or an above average area in terms of being desirable for redevelopment. Is that at least what we're hoping?
My logic so far, yeah.
Right.
Commissioner Wagner?
Yeah, Peter, I agree with you. I think this area is a good area to test. I mean, especially the Grand River frontage. I mean, it's a lot of places are derelict. My question is about the rollout. What do you think? I mean, how would this work? Is it like a 6-month rollout or a year? Are we talking about months, days, years?
I'm thinking I'm thinking months. So, and that's where I wanted to. This was kind of a gut check tonight to see where we are at with it. So if there's one reality in which over the next couple of meetings, council or commission really dives deep on the code itself and understands kind of what built environment that would create in this area. Some things that Taylor and I can do on the background, or will attempt, is to maybe do a couple sample blocks of how massing might look if some properties were redeveloped. And that can always be a little bit dangerous, and neither of us are really graphic designers, but I think it might be helpful to see a bit of a vision for what the code might produce in the future. And that might, and I know that would be helpful for us just in terms of kind of a thought exercise, but yeah, it could. Hearing now kind of where we're at in terms of the public, would be a big part of our implementation strategy. So if we were to get general support to go on further with this with council, we could then shift into gears and engage with the neighbors there, whether it's an open house or some kind of guided meetings, or we have them all here to a work session to talk more about it. However that manifests, that's going to be an important point, and that will tell us more about kind of what legs this has, because if the owners in that area aren't supportive of this, it would certainly be an uphill climb. Just from a policy perspective, I think the elephant in the room on the form-based code is the idea of administrative approvals. But what form-based code basically does is the community establishes the building, the vision, the built environment vision, and then the carrot for developers, if we really want to talk about what areas might be ripe for redevelopment or what might be enticing, is the assurances that you have from the government that this is the kind of house, these are the kind of projects that they want to see. So the investment up front, whether it's in just building plans or time, effort, energy, that kind of thing, to know that there is a pathway to build that, because it's like we, the collective city, have all agreed that this is what we want to see. Now, if that component's not there, I don't think it necessarily kills the idea of form-based code. It might not be. There's probably some people out there that wouldn't want us to call it form-based code in the same way. But I think it still has life in the sense of a zoning district, maybe more flexible standards, reduced setbacks, higher density, greater. There's a lot of components to this. I guess a long answer to what seemed like a simple question, but I could see that's taking place over months. So that's why I thought we'd try to hit the ground running in the new year.
Other comments for staff? Commissioner Develop.
I know at an earlier meeting, we had also looked at applying a new form-based code to the Red Cedar area directly to the south.
Right.
I don't recall how that discussion ended up. But I wonder if we can perhaps consider these two kind of pockets, and ultimately decide on which one we think might be best for exploring that kind of early implementation.
Okay. I can put some information together like we have done for this area for a future meeting. Okay. So our plan is we won't get too far down the road certainly without consulting council to ensure that we're kind of on the path of expectations, policy expectations from them. But I was hoping that this group would find this useful, helpful, interesting for over the next couple of meetings and really dig into it and see where we can move the needle. All right. Well, thanks for your feedback and information. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Item 9, Commissioner concerns. Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, I have a couple. I would like to, if possible, see us complete the sidewalk along Merritt Road. I'm wondering if you have considered the issues there. With the cannabis retailer on the north putting in a sidewalk along Merritt Road, and the cannabis retailer on the south end having already put in a sidewalk, there is only one property in between them that does not have a sidewalk, and that is the Red Cedar Spirits. Now, when they, I don't know if you're aware of the history of that at all, or?
It was the Public Works garage for the city.
Right. But the approval for that, they normally would have been required to put in a sidewalk at the time that they developed that. And they came to the ZBA while I was on it, asking for a variance. And there was a lot of discussion of it, and several of us were opposed to the variance. We did wind up granting a variance, but with the understanding that they might, or perhaps should, expect in the future to be required to put in the sidewalk in order to complete it when the adjacent properties put in sidewalks. At the time, there were no sidewalks.
Okay.
So the rationale was, well, why should we require them to put in this one segment of sidewalk that doesn't really connect to anything? So we now have 2 out of the 3, and I would like to see us go back and reevaluate the middle portion and see if we can get that put in. There was, I think I can give you a reference. It was, I believe it was March of 2012. I can't remember if that was when the Planning Commission considered it or if that was when it went to City Council. But there was a memo from Director of Public Works at the time. I can't think of his name right now, but saying that he thought it was appropriate that it be required in the future. And there was also discussion saying that the City Council had the power in the future to put it in themselves and assess the property owners for it. So I wonder if you could, when you have some time, it's obviously not super high priority.
Absolutely. I can look into where that's at and where it goes from
and
here.
possibly consider if it's appropriate to take some action there and see if we can get that sidewalk in.
Okay. Was it Director Matuzek?
No.
No, okay.
It was
Different
after
director?
Sneathan. It was Todd Sneathan.
Okay.
At that point.
I will look into that, and report back. Thank you.
Okay. And then a second one about the Woodside Drive, is it, property? I'm not sure I understood what you said about how this would go forward to council.
Oh, so it'll go forward as your recommendation would be to R1 without the condition. So we'll just, as it would be, it's the same process as if you had recommended approval or
Okay,
denial,
but the-
really.
But the application goes forward as an application for a conditional rezoning to RM32.
Yeah, the rezoning request stays the same. Your recommendation is kind of on its own as
Right.
a recommendation from this
Okay,
group.
I thought you were implying that our recommendation was actually going to change
No.
what goes to council, which.
No, sorry if we said that, it was a mistake.
Right, so the applicants will, it'll still go forward as they want it to, but
Yep.
with a,
Just with the
different
some new
recommendation.
information with your recommendation.
Right.
And that is scheduled for the 10th at council.
right, thanks.
Yep.
I have one, it was going to be just a comment, but now it's, given the comments that Commissioner Wolf has just made, that it's become an ever-increasing concern. For those of you that aren't aware, this will be Commissioner Wolf's last meeting with us as a planning commission member, and I will most decidedly hate to see you go. Chris came from us from the Zoning Board of Appeals, and due to the way my initial appointment was made, I sort of picked up half a term. I'm actually serving slightly longer than, I've been on the commission as long as you have, and you're rotating off. I'll rotate off next December. But sort of just the comment, the institutional knowledge that you bring, I mean, just the sort of general knowledge about zoning and planning, and our discussion regarding the Shaping the Avenue reminds me of all the countless meetings we had and your attention to detail that you brought to those meetings. And it seemed like we'd get a couple of pages down through the text, and then Chris would remember one phrase 3 pages previous that sort of contradicted something that we had just talked about. And so was just the attention to detail has been astounding, and I'm going to miss you, and I appreciate all you've done, and I hope you circle back and maybe go back to zoning board or something. Stay involved, because you are definitely an asset to our fair city.
Thanks.
Thank you. Absolutely. Smattering of applause.
I've definitely enjoyed my time on the commission, enjoyed working with all of you. I'm glad it's been educational, and I keep learning new stuff about planning and zoning.
Sure.
All the way through. It's been challenging. And, you mentioned the work of the subcommittee. I think that will be my most memorable experience from being on the commission.
Absolutely.
Is the hours and hours over, I don't know how many months it was, working with Dan and Cindy on the Shaping the Avenue code. So, and I have been discussing with Peter. I wasn't sure I want to take on a full committee assignment or commission assignment again. So I may be applying to be an alternate on the ZBA. The ZBA is a little different than most of the other ones. They have alternates so that they can have a full commission for as many meetings as possible.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. Any other concerns? Commissioner Williams.
I don't have a concern, but I just don't feel like I can leave without formally thanking Chris too. We spent so many hours working on the Shaping the Avenue project together, and I just learned so much from you. I mean, I really did, and I really appreciated your attention to detail and your commitment and your service to the city, and I'm going to really miss you.
I'm going to miss this too.
Thank you.
All right, then, if there's no other concerns, then a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
Support.
Appropriate. All those in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed. We are adjourned at 8 o'clock. Thank you all. Thanks, Chris.
It just won't be the same.